And now we will enter deep into the rock and roll heart, where we find jazz. Hey everyone, my name is Rich, and this is Rich Talks Records, episode number 45, and this is going to be the exciting conclusion of the Lou Reed in 1975 and 1976 trilogy. Hopefully, this won't be the Godfather 3 of the entry. Always the thing to be worried about. So anyway, today we will be focusing on Lou Reed firmly in 1976. So where we last left off was Reed had released the triumphant Coney Island Baby, and to acclaim, and for some people restoring the restoration of his reputation after Metal Machine Music. In early 1976 was the third, I guess, epic Lester Bangs piece about his review of Metal Machine Music that also touched upon Coney Island Baby, etc., etc. Probably my single favorite thing that Lester wrote about Reed, because it's the most gonzo, it's the most absurd, and I love it. The other, and also Lou Reed at the end of 75 had been bombarded with John Holmstrom and Legs McNeil while at CBG was watching television, and he was interviewed for Punk. And of course, the famous line from that was, they said, "We'll put you on the cover," and Lou Reed deadpanned, "Oh, your circulation must be fabulous," which is one of the great self-deprecating one-liners of all time. So Reed's reputation, like in New York and sort of in the burgeoning punk world, probably couldn't have been greater. I think his stock was pretty high in that sense, and as being a countercultural figure, he was about as countercultural as it was ever going to get, and that was not astroturfed. So that was the real deal. So anyway, in 1976. Reed was frustrated, though, I think, that Coney Island Baby didn't sell, and was being courted by, the ever-ambitious Clive Davis. So I've talked about this in my Iggy Pop avant-garde... Whoa, I just hit the tripod. I talked about this in my, probably part one, I guess, of the Iggy Pop avant-garde New Wave period. And... Clive Davis went and, he had signed Patti Davis, so Horses came out in 1975. And then, and then he snatched up Lou Reed, and then he snatched up Iggy Pop. So that it's pretty interesting that Clive was a major figure in that world at the time. And you could argue just as much as Seymour Stein was, as far as record executives go. So the stories of Clive Davis courting Lou Reed are pretty interesting, because Reed liked that Clive had signed and given such a big push to Patti Smith, and basically took Clive on a tour of the New York Demomonde and sort of his underworld, his New York, and Clive wasn't of course going to divulge details, but just repeated how eye-opening all of it was, and I can only imagine. Because at this point, the Lister circle was still very much going strong, and I forget the ins and outs of that now. But there had been a shortage, and there was sort of a crisis, and there was and Victor Bockris goes into great detail about the phenomenon of shooting twice boiled capsules to make the methamphetamine, which you were basically just injecting hot water, which was known as bone crushers. It was really, really severe, horrible body aches, and then horrible fluctuating fevers. But at some point, new shipment came in, all was right with the world. Reed was ready to roll again, and he went about making his debut album for Arista Records. So interestingly, he had held on to his band and added a couple people. And so I had never really been able to pin down what the recording dates were of Rock and Roll Heart. It's always been that at some point in 1976, Lou Reed knocked this album out. And there's always been pretty scant information about how it was, like actually recorded, right? So what was interesting about, and when did this come out? This was in 2000, but I bought this years later, probably in the middle 2000s. These were the Buddha reissues that came out in 2000, but like I said, I purchased years later. But what was interesting is right here, whoa, don't want to drop the disc, we have track sheets, and you can see 8/26/76. So this was recorded in the summer of 1976. So also, Patti Smith was off the road because Lou Reed, in the liner notes, briefly discusses that she had come by the recording sessions. And Lou Reed and Patti Smith had sort of a love-hate sort of thing. And I think that there was the stuff that he was impressed with and thought was amazing about her, and then there was the stuff that he found very eye-rolling. And if I may be perfectly honest, that has been sort of my relationship with Patti Smith. On one half, evangelical fervor and a certain amount of transcendent fucking art, and then there's the other stuff, and you kind of, you either have the patience or you sort of run out. So within, Lou Reed, by the time he makes Take No Prisoners, he's openly taking shots at Patti Smith. But here there was a, I mean, she was a fan of his work, so there was kind of an uneasy tension in some ways, which I always find that fascinating. I think they kind of reconciled in later years. So at any rate, at some point in the summer of 1976, Reed and band go into the record plant where John Lennon recorded, and make this album. Now, for years, I completely dismissed this album. So this is what I first would have gotten at Secondhand Tunes. This is what I would have purchased. It still plays great. I don't know where these albums, I don't know who gave away their Lou Reed albums. I remember once, this is pretty obscure, I remember I had an aunt who was apartment sitting for someone, and I remember they had a CD rack. This would have been in 1990, and the CD rack was nearly only Lou Reed albums. It was the first, and I knew who Lou Reed was because of Dirty Boulevard and Romeo Had Juliet on VH1, and I was like, wow, that's so wild that this person is that seemed very adult and intellectual to me, and kind of intimidatingly so, because I would have been full on in my heavy metal period at that point. But at any rate, but this is what I got. At some point, somebody got rid of most of their Lou Reed albums, and once I started buying Lou Reed solo albums in late 95, early 96, somewhere in there, I went pretty quickly, kind of like with Neil Young and Bob Dylan. I just blitzed through that stuff pretty quickly. And probably by 98, I would have to imagine I had all or nearly all of them. I wasn't screwing around. So, but Rock and Roll Heart, I hated. Hated is a strong word. Hated is strong. I didn't hate it. There were albums I hated and couldn't listen to. However, I did see this album, I'll be honest, as a blotch on the 70s work. And objectively speaking, I think that it is the weakest of his 70s albums. The big competition would be the first solo album, but the first solo album does have Wild Child, and it does have Love Makes You Feel 10 Foot Tall, which is one of his most affecting songs, and I think that is a good relation from the Velvet Underground version of the song, and doesn't suffer by comparison, as most of that album does. So, this one kind of gets the nod, I think. The other one that some people would put up would be Sally Can't Dance. However, there's a lot of Sally Can't Dance that I think is brilliant, and a lot about Sally Can't Dance that I really, really appreciate. I understand that Reed wasn't that involved in it, but are some of those songs are truly, truly outstanding. I mean, Ennui is fucking brilliant, and very moving. And "Kill Your Sons" is one of his greatest songs. And then "Babyface" is a great underrated song. "New York Stars" is a great, like, I love it. I think it's hysterical. And then the last song on the album, "Billy." I love Billy. I always have loved Billy. I think that's an incredibly affecting piece of writing. So, and then performance, and I love the sax, and like it's everything I love about some of the sort of New York Tattoo You vibe, side two of Tattoo You vibe years before that record. So I love a lot of I kind of can't front on Sally Can't Dance. Yes, there's some of it that's really wonky and slapdash, but like the good stuff is great. So I can't really put that down. I More than any other video I've ever made, people seem to be very curious about what my opinion of this album is going to be. But I will tell you, in 1997, it was low. It wasn't rock bottom. It wasn't like Neil Young's "Landing on Water" or Bob Dylan's what was it, "Knocked Out Loaded" or "Empire Burlesque." It wasn't like that bad, but it wasn't great. However, soon enough, my attitude about it started to evolve, and we'll get into that. I guess maybe I will get into that now, of why it started to evolve. As I was entering my 20s and my tastes were quickly evolving and emerging, and in part because of Neil Young and some of Dylan's stuff. And all three of those guys were all sort of happening at the same time for me in a lot of ways. But one of the things that became really interesting to me was in the case of like Neil Young's "Comes a Time" album, or Dylan's Nashville Skyline, to a degree Self-Portrait, which I always used to call Self-Portrait Metal Machine Music Unplugged. And you could also make the case for New Morning. But then by the time you get to a Neil Young album like Silver and Gold being a really good example, I became kind of fascinated with this phenomenon that I think of as the subtext album, where there's maybe seemingly not a lot happening on the surface, but there actually is a lot happening on the album, and there actually is a lot worth listening to and worth investigating. And that's kind of what I have come to find about Rock and Roll Heart. Is it still objectively his weakest studio album of the 70s? Again, yeah, probably, because it doesn't sort of have the major songs. The other thing is, if you take Rock and Roll Heart out of the discography, let's say it wasn't allowed to be released for some reason, you would go straight from Coney Island Baby to Street Hassle to the Bells. And that's one hell of a 3-album run. Like, that's pretty spotless. Because I consider those 3 albums to be pretty perfect. Especially the Bells. That's just triumphant top-level work. Combined with his live work in this era. So, I do have to say that objectively, maybe it is, however, there is much to admire about it. And I became kind of fascinated with it as a subtext album. And part of the reason, funnily, was because as my tastes matured, I got into the legendary band Suicide. And this is a release that was originally on cassette. I'm yet again going to reference the cassette-only label, ROIR, Reach Out International Records. This came out, so this was a cassette. This is called Half Alive. And Half Alive, this was reissued in 2000. It originally came out in 81. Half of it is rehearsal recordings. Half of it is live stuff. It is seriously lo-fi. It is not just minimal in recording, it is minimal in composition, even by Suicide standards, to the degree that it sounds at times almost as if nothing's happening. And yet there's a lot happening. And this was sort of, I knew about like Brian Eno and ambient music, but this was my first sort of realization of ambient music in a way, where I would drive and listen to this, and I would think over the top of it. And I realized that there actually was a lot happening in here. And in the form of the song Love You is a stone cold fucking classic. Like, that should have been in a David Lynch movie. It's a fucking masterpiece. And what I started to sort of connect in my mind was, and this is pretty loose, but this is how my thinking worked. I started to realize that basically what Rock and Roll Heart was like Half Alive, but with like the sort of production values and aesthetics of this misunderstood album, Bob Dylan's 1990 Under the Red Sky. I started to sort of put together that this plus this kind of sort of equaled this. This very confident, brassy production, idiosyncratic songs, stark minimalism, even starker moods, unafraid of its to steal the phrase from Stephen Davis, unafraid of its own black juices. The odd jamming together, and this was another album I really, really, really disliked until maybe 2001 or so. I got this bootleg, The Peddler Now Speaks, and The Peddler Now Speaks is 2 shows from Philadelphia. Well, I don't know if the last couple songs to fill it out are from us, the night after. I don't know if both shows are in Philadelphia, but from 1995, and Bob does a number of Under the Red Sky songs on here, and they are outstanding. They are transformed to the degree that I was kind of in disbelief that these were the same songs. That, you know, on first hearing, if I didn't know better, I would have thought that they were new songs that he was debuting, and they were these really cool, like, chock-a-block blues numbers that are like really powerful and hard-hitting, and you don't need a lot because there's so much like force to the expression of it. So those things combined over time started to shift my perception of Rock and Roll Heart. And what sealed my shift in attitude towards Rock and Roll Heart. Now, I was gonna do this stupid thing, which I guess I will do. I was gonna because these are the kinds of ideas that I have. I was gonna imitate Howard Cosell, and I was gonna I had this whole thing I was gonna start the video with. I'll throw it in now. What the hell? I'm not gonna tell you this is a major album. I will do nothing of it's nothing of the sort. And that was actually more like Ethel Merman than Howard Cosell. That was awful. So anyway, that's not why you fucking tune in, right? So anyway, there was halfway between Ethel Merman and Paul Lynde. That wasn't Howard Cosell. Terrible, Rich. Jesus Christ. So I don't want to overstate it. It still objectively isn't a patch on the albums that came before and then the albums that came after. And if you count Berlin, and I mean, like, you know, it's a couple of years away from the Blue Mask, you know. But even Legendary Hearts. I mean, Legendary Hearts overall is probably a worse album than this. But even Legendary Hearts has Think It Over and Teach the Gift to Children, both of which are fucking, I think, total stunners. Think It Over is a classic. Think It Over is one of Reed's 20 best songs. Like, that song is fucking great. So, to me, like, you can't front on Think It Over. You know what I mean? So, this album doesn't it doesn't have that. On the other hand, you can easily play this album start to finish and get really, really deep into it and have it be kind of an environmental experience, whereas you cannot have that listening to Growing Up in Public. When the Shake Your Booty Mama section of So Alone, that commands your attention in fucking all of the wrong ways. So anyway, but I was, and I've referenced this girl before. I was kind of sort of seeing this girl. She lived way out in Bufu, and she was, she had sort of like an au pair gig for a while. The family would be out of town. She would put the kid to sleep, and then she would say, like, call me up and be like, hey, come on over. Or I'm going to have the kid asleep in 45 minutes. Why don't you get in the car now? Because it was a long drive. And for whatever reason, this and Half Alive, but really this, kind of became my soundtrack music, because I would drive this long distance. I mean, I knew why I was going there, but especially on the ride home, I couldn't help but thinking, what the hell am I doing? Why am I doing this? Like, I should, my priorities are really screwed up. And this is a very, very, very good drive between the mix of serious emotions, its ability to blend into the background, its much needed bursts of humor and self-knowing humor, self-satire, all of that. It's when you are a young man, it is a very good driving at night, thinking, what the fuck am I goddamn doing with my life kind of album. It helps you sort things out. So for that, and continuing, as I for a while in this time was also editing, there was a friend that I had worked with where I was editing his writing. This was, again, excellent. This and Marvin Gaye's I Want You were excellent editing music to, again, sort of have just sort of going off to the side, So I have appreciated it in that sense. I sometimes put it on when, a couple of years ago at work, or maybe about 10 years ago at work, it was another great album when I would be doing what I was doing, where I was looking at like the same information for hours on end and analyzing it. Like, I can still, like, Ladies Pay, like the piano in Ladies Pay is still somehow subconsciously linked to my experiences of doing that. So all that to say, I have come to appreciate it. By no means is it a bad album. Like, by no means is it a weak album. And the only competition is with Reed himself, right? It is only by his own lofty standards, and that he has created albums of such staggering significance and such depths of artistry, like Coney Island Baby, for instance, which I rhapsodized about last time, that this album is weak by comparison, right? I could easily name 24 bands or artists that if they made this album, I would think, oh, they're finally onto something, who've maybe outsold Reed many times over and are and in some cases are maybe even more critically acclaimed. So truly, it's only by his standards, and it's only because he is really, truly like one of the absolute greatest artists in the history of rock and roll. So, which is my favorite art form. It's my favorite medium. So let us now get into album talk, shall we? And I will just note here that I will talk about the album artwork, the very striking album artwork later in the video, because half this video is going to be Lou Reed in the studio, and the second half is going to be Lou Reed on the road. Reed self-produced, so this was his premiere, producing himself, and that. Did he ever really work with a producer ever again? I mean, he collaborated with people. I mean, he collaborated with Fernando Saunders on Mistrial and stuff like that. I mean, he worked closely with engineers and stuff. But I think this. I don't know that he really ever used an outside producer ever again. I don't think so. So this is the premiere of Reed the producer, and and as I said before, and his debut on Arista Records. So the band is so we retain the Bruce Yaw on bass and Michael Sachorsky. I'm just committing to Sachorsky now. Nobody's corrected me, so Sachorsky. But Michael Fanfara from the Sally Can't Dance days is back, and Marty Fogel is on saxophone. And Marty Fogel and Fanfara are, to my mind, the sonic elements you think of the most when you think of the Everyman Band. This is the Everyman Band, like really like solidified now. Like with the addition of Fanfara, like that's the fucking Everyman Band sound as it comes to be defined, I think, over the next few years. Don't fuck with me, Michael. So, and then we have Lou Reed doing vocals, but and playing guitar. I'll point that out on when it comes up. But guitar, and this is. I was trying to think about this yesterday. Is this? No, it's not until New Sensations that Lou Reed is the sole guitar player again. So it's nearly a decade. But this was the first time that ever happened, and Reed's guitar is not prominent most of the time, but it makes some significant appearances. I will be pointing those out. So that's the band. And there's a guest vocalist, and we will get into that when the time comes. So Rock and Roll Heart came out in November of '76, and it leads off with one of my favorite songs on this album, "I Believe in Love." It's fucking weird. What because it's sort of a, it's sort of like an old school, almost like oh my God, what are the guys who wrote the songs for the Coasters? It's almost like that sort of what frat, quote unquote, R&B 50s thing. It very, very much has that vibe. And I can't believe I'm blanking on their names. And my brain is telling me Holland Dozier Holland, and it's like, that's not even close. And what's more infuriating, I can picture their faces. Anyway, it very much has their vibe. The two guys I can't goddamn think of. But I Believe in Love. I love it. It is so it's bouncy. It's ebullient, but it's fundamentally grounded in a rock and roll sensibility. And then you have Reed's vocal, which is just like purely alien. It's like an alien trying to fit in with humans on this planet called Earth. Like it's like an AI machine, like analyzed party songs and attempted to write its own. Like it's like a weird rogue HAL computer version of what a fun rock and roll song would be, including the very peculiar throwing in, again, a year and a half or whatever removed from the infamous haircut, photographed to be seen around the world, "I Believe in the Iron Cross." So even in his good time party, he fucking throws in "I Believe in the Iron Cross." Because of course he does, because it's Lou Reed. And that's kind of what I mean by like the subtext. Like the text is good time party, and Reed even himself said, you should find it a little strange that I'm singing "I Believe in Love," right? And yet, we know he does. So what is he playing at? What kind of weird alien mind games is he playing? And then there's the fact that Reed is providing his own backing vocals. And, there are people who don't like Lou Reed's singing voice, blah, blah, blah. We've all had to listen to that fucking shit, and he can't sing and all. Whew, boy, aren't you tired of that shit? Aren't you fucking tired of being told that he doesn't know how to sing? Oh, Christ. And obviously I'm not going to go into it, but same thing with Dylan. Like, aren't you fucking sick of that shit? before I met my wife, I went on one of the worst dates of my life. The date was so bad I drove home crying. Like and I'm not a crier. I fucking cried. That's how bad it was. That's how like how has my life wound up like this fucking moment. And part of that was she went on this bizarre tangent about how Bob Dylan literally doesn't know how to sing, and she kept like really emphasizing that, as if I didn't understand what the concept of singing and then not being able to sing could ever mean. Anyway, so sorry for that tangent, but so some of Reed's most conventionally beautiful singing ever, in the entirety of his recording career, is the backing vocals for this album. The backing vocals are fucking fantastic. They're spectral and like really well thought out. And it's funny to think that that's just him tracking himself. And you think about it, he had been double tracked like on Transformer and stuff. But Reed wasn't like a person who, you know, it's not like it's like John Lennon or Paul McCartney, where he's been tracking his own voice since the fucking early 60s. Like, that's not really something Reed had ever done before. So this talent emerges, and then also the talent to just arrange the backing vocals, because again, he's not working with a producer. There's no Godfrey Diamond, there's no David Bowie. He's just like, there's no Tom Wilson for that matter. He's just doing this, right? It's really remarkable. So, and there's the sort of spectral good time music, but then the more sort of streety, almost sort of chanty call and response R&B, the I believe, like, so even the background vocals have their own character. That even that's not treated in a monochromatic way, and it's a beautiful detail. Also, Marty Fogel's saxophone is just straight classic King Curtis, again, like 50s chock-a-block playing. Like, it's just fucking fantastic. So I Believe in Love. It's funny, it's weird, it's sincere, but it's sincere in like a wounded romantic way, where it's gonna kind of like fuck with you a little bit. Like, it's the thing that Reed does. There's the filter. There's the filter who, like, the people who like sort of don't get it are going to go away, and then the people who are going to hang in there, right? There is that thing with Reed, you know. So I Believe in Love. Always have loved it, right? And then we get into Banging on My Drum. So we know that Reed had heard the Ramones by this point. He was going to check out CBGB's bands, all of which were in their ascendance, and in some cases already starting to get signed. And this is a weird interpretation of what quote unquote punk was. This is a weird version of it. Almost a parody. I mean, it's almost like a joke version of the Ramones. But I don't think it is. And Reed seemed kind of perplexed that the Rolling Stone album guide makes yet another appearance, where they asserted that this was a song about onanism, which sums up this tossed off throwaway album. So Reed himself seemed very perplexed by that one, that they somehow had taken this as some kind of ode to the manipulation of one's own genitals for the purposes of self-gratification. I think he really was just trying to write a simple song. And the other thing that's really cool about it is this is one of the few times on the album where Reed's guitar is really prominent, and his guitar sounds fucking great, and he's nice and high up in the mix, and the band is just banging away, and Reed sounds fucking great doing like Chuck Berry changes. He almost never does that. In this period, he did it. There's some on Transformer, and then there's some later on in the 90s and 2000s. But this sort of period of him just kind of doing straight rock and roll changes, really cool. Love it. It sounds great. And the fact that the song is 2 minutes and 3 seconds really helps. I think if it was a minute longer, or if it was 30 seconds shorter, I think if it was 30 seconds shorter, if it was just a minute, it would be too much of a fragment, it would be too much of a pastiche, and if it was longer, it would really overstay its welcome. So it's like the perfect length. The one thing I will say, the one thing that, and we'll get more into this later, part of what I think gives this album a bad rep in some ways is the sequencing of this album is fucking all over the place. That, I think, is one... It's almost more like somebody's playlist version of the album than the actual sequence of the album. Reed, going back to the first Velvet Underground album, all the way through, think of Berlin, think of Coney Island Baby, Reed is a master of sequencing. Like, he's one of the best that ever lived at it, right? And boy, is he triumphant with it into the 80s. The New Sensations is a triumph of sequencing in a lot of ways, because there are some songs that are weaker on New Sensations, and yet you don't ever think about that. You think about that because everything leads to the two great doing the things that we want to, the title track. Everything leads to and comes from those two giants on that album. Yeah, when Reed was focused on sequencing, he was truly one of the best in the world at it, and kind of Beatles. Like, Beatles level album sequencing, which is like the highest compliment I can give, because to me they're the standard bearers of how to put an album together, right? So I say that because you go straight from Banging on My Drums. Oh, and the other thing is, Reed, is this the first one ever on any of his solo albums up to this point? Reed actually does a solo. He does a classic early rock and roll, early Beatles for that matter. I don't know what he was thinking about them, but maybe he was. But all chord, pure rhythm guitar solo. Fucking great. It's great. It's got attitude, it's got verve, it's got soul. It's a great little solo. And also fanfara pounding away on, again, very stylized 50s rock and roll playing. It's fantastic. So I love it. Then we get into Follow the Leader. And this is, I think, where the sequencing sort of goes akimbo a little. I kind of wish Follow the Leader had maybe been on side 2. The weird jolt of going into Banging on My Drums and then going into Follow the Leader, and the fact that Follow the Leader is, again, just a little over 2 minutes and so brutally minimal, I think sets kind of a weird tone for the album. Also, that the tempo for Follow the Leader is so frantic that I think that having songs that short and that minimalist makes it seem like the album doesn't sort of know where it's going. It feels like somebody careening around, and it feels like it's looking for a sense of direction. So I don't think the sequencing does it any favors. Now, let's talk about Follow the Leader as a song. So Follow the Leader, so I only knew it from here because I got this in the 90s. However, when did this thing finally come out? I don't even remember anymore. This was 2001, no kidding. Wow, I thought this was much later. So this was the bootleg series live recordings, most of which had been taped by Robert Quine. And on here is, and it's, what is it, from November 27th, 1969, the Velvet Underground performed Follow the Leader. And the Velvet Underground apparently only performed this song one time. It is over 17 minutes, and it's I don't want to overrate it, because the Velvet Underground, again, like the Beatles, like Dylan, like whatever, like Miles Davis, only exists at the highest levels and at the highest fucking standards, right? However, so I don't want to necessarily call it a masterpiece, because you're talking then about Sister Ray and Heroin and all of these incredible, Some Kind of Love. You're talking about all these, like, Sweet Jane. You're talking about all these glorious fucking monumental works of art. But maybe just a level under that. Follow the Leader, the one time they performed it, over 17 minutes, is fucking unbelievable. It's fucking unbelievable. It's the groove that the band sets. You could call it a jam, but the groove that the band sets, and then all of the rhythmic shifts, all of the rhythmic variations, all of the different different rhythmic emphasis moments, all of the differing layered forms of syncopation. I have to imagine that's Sterling Morrison doing the leads. Some of Sterling Morrison's greatest work doing leads. Like, holy Christ, it is just a fucking classic that just overflows with rhythmic ideas and rhythmic invention, and it's so combustible and so impressive because it's held together and they are just super, super, super in the pocket. It's awesome. Awesome. And again, they hold it together with all of the different emphasis and all of the different rhythmic stuff. They hold it together for over a quarter of an hour. Amazing. And hold your attention, like you are in it with them. Unbelievable. The lyrics are not that fleshed out. I would imagine Lou Reed was probably improvising most of them. There are moments where it seems a little bit more fleshed out than what is here on Rock and Roll Heart. However, it's also very hard to determine what he's singing, just the fidelity of the recording. So what we have here is really, really minimalist. I mean, this is minimalist. This is extreme minimalism, and very frantic. And Marty Fogel's sax is all over the place, and it sounds, at times it borders on sounding sort of, it could be grand and cinematic, but it's so frantic. And what's that's holding it together? What's that's really, really, really making sense out of it? Bruce Yaw's bass playing. This is where Bruce Yaw starts to steal the show. This is where he starts to really make his presence felt. And what he's doing, and like the octave jumping and the sort of counter melodies and variations he's doing, Bruce Yaw's fucking making this a fucking groove powerhouse in the space of 2 minutes. He's moving mountains around and kind of starting to steal the album. It's really, really, really impressive. Follow the Leader winds up becoming a great, great, great piece of music. I don't know that I would say that it's a great song, but it is a great piece of music. Compare it to the Velvet Underground, it's a whole different animal. Both are amazing. I don't know that I want to say one is necessarily better than the other because they are so drastically different. There's a quarter of an hour of difference between the two, and the weird rhythmic tightness and twists and turns aren't present here. This is way more open-ended. It's a lot more jazz and funk based, but still with kind of a weird New York CBGB punk rock energy to it. So I really like Follow the Leader. Now we get into the first of many. We get it, and this was one of the things that sort of killed my perception of this album for the first year or two that I had it. We get into the ballads, the long ballads. So the very first one is You Wear It So Well. And You Wear It So Well, first of all, it's spare. It's really minimalist. There's not that much happening in it, right? So there's not that much happening on the one hand. On the other hand, as far as piano playing is absolutely outstanding. And I think without his playing, I'm not really sure how this song would hold together, because he's the linchpin in it. There is a sense of drama to it, and that is one of the things where this album, and I've talked about it being an environment record and being a contemplative album and an album that can force retrospection in the listener. That's part of what this album has. And there is very much, and I talked about Phil Spector in the last one, this is what Spector should have been producing in the 70s. This is what Spector should have been doing. Spector should have been Reed's producer, right? But Spector was I kind of think Spector might have been brain damaged after the car crashes in the early 70s, and kind of like O.J. Simpson, another person who did that and who I think was probably a borderline case, who was always a borderline case, and there were already lots of weird stories about, and was kind of barely holding it together. I think that, is it CET? I think that's, or CTE. I forget what it's called. I think that the post getting their heads knocked around, that's where the weird shit and the violent shit just goes through the roof. And not, especially Phil just really wasn't able to function. And I really do kind of think that's what happened with him. That's not to excuse. I mean, again, he did what he fucking did. But I do think that did play a factor in what wound up happening to him, and also his just sort of psychological obliteration, slow motion obliteration that happened over time. Because I think that if Spector had really had his ear to the ground, this is what he should have been doing. I know he tried to do the Leonard Cohen Ladies Man album, but like, he really should have produced this. This should have been like a late period classic of his, and this, between this and then what if he had been fully functioning, what he could have done with End of the Century. Because End of the Century didn't have to be like that. Do you know what I mean? I like parts of End of the Century. I Can't Make It on Time is one of my favorite Ramones songs of all time. But like, it didn't have to be like that. It could have been fucking amazing with his style and Joey's voice. Like, that could have been epic. And then it like, it isn't. So I will just say that. But even without Spector, Reed produces this grandiose drama out of, and believable drama, palpable drama, really just out of sound and the playing of the band. The other thing that is highly effective are the backing vocals, or the co-lead vocal, even if you want to think about it that way, of this man, Garland Jeffries, Reed's buddy from college. So this is a great album, by the way. This is the Ghostwriter album. Also, his self-titled album is another great one. But if you like this period of Lou Reed, right, and you like Garland Jeffries' beautiful, haunting, soulful, truly soulful voice on You Wear It So Well, you should check this album out. I highly recommend it. I've owned it for, I don't know, 25 years now. I don't know. I've had it for a hell of a long time. It was just one of those like weird, random finds that I made. And you should absolutely check it out. Like, Garland Jeffries is a great, underrated artist. So he is well worth your time. So you have his beautiful, soulful voice mixing with Reed's emotional voice. I don't know that Reed isn't a soul singer, but he certainly is emotionally driven, and which is probably why he works so hard to not be so fucking emotional. Which I think is part of the thing that some people don't understand about him, where they call him icy or detached. I think it's a man trying to control himself is really what it is, and a man who's afraid of himself in his most naked moments, and that creates all the tension within him that forces out these unbelievable performances. So anyway, it's 4.5 minutes. It is a great atmospheric piece and really, really believable. And again, I don't know that I would call it a great song per se, but it is a great open-ended piece of music that allows you to project into it in a really effective way. So, and then we go into another over 4-minute piano-led ballad. So I will say, it is a little frustrating for me that Reed, on the one album where he's playing all the guitar, that that he doesn't really, the guitar is not that prominent really, but and we'll get to that in a second. So this song is Ladies Pay, and Ladies Pay, if I talked about, did I say it about Charlie's Girl, I think, of being the beginning of the sort of Street Hassle Bells voice, but really the Bells singing voice? This is almost the beginning of the Bells writing style. This could almost be like the first song written for the Bells in a sense. Ladies Pay has that sort of world-weary, distant character driven, exhausted, sad people who haven't reached where they wanted to be in life, or life hasn't been what they had hoped it would be for them. Thing the psychic heaviness that permeates the Bells. It kind of starts here with Ladies Pay, and or maybe it was in its germination form with Ennui on Sally Can't Dance, but Ladies Pay is a beautifully effective piece of writing. It's more lyrically fleshed out, which helps, and I think it needs it, because there's a lot of atmosphere on this album, and you need a little more something to grab onto. The other thing about Ladies Pay is Reed's guitar, which I always had played this album in the car, or I would play this album on my stereo, right? It wasn't until, like Metal Machine Music, and kind of inspired by my experience of listening to Metal Machine Music, I decided to listen to this album on headphones. And again, the album, I started to hear it again in new ways. And I started to hear more subtleties. So when you just play the album out on the stereo, there's Reed's famous guitar on it, but you hear it all the more precisely on headphones, and it's actually a more satisfying listen on headphones, because it's almost like the guitar solo is like a composition within the song, and it is just this tortured, writhing piece that is just this, again, writhing, shuddering piece of sound noise generation that is really, really impressive and really beautiful. I wish it was a little louder in the mix, but like I said, if you play it on headphones, you can really appreciate where it is off on the left, right? and enjoy it for the way that it was intended to be. But Reed hadn't been that adventurous, taking Metal Machine Music out of the mix. Reed hadn't been that adventurous on record with his guitar. I mean, I don't know, since I don't know when. I mean, maybe the intro to Sweet Jane or something. Like, it had, that side of him just hadn't really factored in his music very much. And it was such a crucial part of his music, So it's a beautiful, affecting piece. Again, Fanfara's piano is, gives so much atmosphere and fills in so much of the picture. But what do we have yet again? We have another motherfucker of a bass part from Bruce Yaw. Bruce Yaw is fucking tearing it up down there. And he kind of, to me, almost threatens to steal the show away from Reed's guitar. It's so good. His bass playing is fucking fantastic on this. So it's kind of Bruce Yaw's moment. And in a weird way, kind of in the same way that he was almost sort of duetting on She's My Best Friend on Coney Island Baby. It's almost like a continuation of that idea. And then we get the slam bang into the title track, Rock and Roll Heart. Now, this is where Reed's guitar finally is fully unleashed. That riff, Reed the riff writer, is something that hadn't really existed again. I mean, not really since Transformer. He hadn't particularly been a riff writer, and he had, up in the early part of his life, he had been one of the great rock and roll riff writers. And it's something that he's not known for. I mean, he's not talked about the way that a Jimmy Page or a Tony Iommi is talked about as somebody who can churn out these like amazing riffs. But this is a great one. It is a classic. And that guitar tone, the blazing fire of the guitar sound is perfect. And it does make you wish that there was more of that sort of Nowhere at All, 75 version of Leave Me Alone thing in his recordings. And, you do wish that it had been there more often, because he's just so fucking good at it, right? So Rock and Roll Heart, I mean, that riff alone almost guarantees that it's going to be a classic of some sort, right? So, and then the guitar drops out, and you've just got fanfara on what I would imagine is synthesizer. So he's credited with Hammond, organ, clavinet, arp, and synthesizer, and obviously piano. So I don't know if it's an arp. I'm not sure what it is, but the brum, 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 brum. And that, interestingly, also becomes part of the Everyman Band sound. Like that, because that, interestingly, in the tonality of some of what fanfara does, really mixes in with Fogel's saxophone, and really does create this, again, kind of weird, writhing, sort of emotional, twitching sound that is just always kind of simmering, and then it can explode, especially live. And it's an interesting trio of fanfara when he does arp or synth stuff, Fogel saxophone, and then Reed's voice. And it's almost as if Reed is Reed is trying to, in his mind, I think, sing in sort of a soul style, and trying to sort of do Al Green or something. In his great series of Lou Reed videos, Edwin Catastracci talks about Jerry Lewis's influence on Lou Reed, which I don't think is definitely not remarked upon enough. And so I think there's that. That comes to the fore definitely on Take No Prisoners. But I also think that in a way, maybe subconsciously even, Reed is almost like fitting in the frequency range with Fogel and fanfara as like a trio, like a trio of voices, and that's always how it has come off to me. So anyway, Rock and Roll Heart, I mean, the legendary set of lyrics, it's really funny. It's really self-deprecating. It is hilarious self-satire, but because I mean, somebody who's dumb wouldn't fucking write this, right? And it kind of reminds me of the story that Richard Hell told about Dee Dee Ramone, that, there were all the Ramones songs of I don't want to go around with you, I don't want to go into the basement. There were all the I don't songs. And Dee Dee said, I didn't write a positive song until now I want to sniff some glue. And he was pointing out, a dumb guy would never say that. That's fucking genius. There's no dumb guy that would come out with that. So like, I guess that I'm dumb because I knows I'm not smart. Because like, a dumb guy isn't gonna say that. Like, and then that fucking second verse. Like, I wish people like that would go away as well, Lou. Like, I'm right there with you. And Lou Reed does have a rock and roll heart. And I also see it's self-deprecating, and there's a lot of knowing wink to the audience. Almost as much of knowing wink to the audience as there is in silly love songs. Here I go again, But the thing is, I think that there are different types of intelligence, right? And I can see it from the perspective of Reed, who turned down his dad's business, who wasn't able to hold down a job. The one story that he told about, that the one job he had where he was working at Coney Island picking up garbage with the stick with the metal pointer on it, and that lasted like an hour or something. Reed really, he worked briefly as a typist for his dad, but that he really couldn't hold down a job. He could have had the family business, didn't want it, wouldn't have known what to do with it. I can see, and that's on one level. That's on a family level, but then he's got, his mentor Delmore Schwartz, who famously hated rock and roll lyrics. What does Lou Reed go and do? He becomes becomes a rock and roll singer, becomes the rock and roll animal. I can see that Lou Reed could measure himself against both that in the business world, but also just the mainstream functioning world, and the intellectual world, and that he would say, yeah, I guess that I'm dumb. Like, Brian Wilson made a similar point with his fucking masterpiece that Glenn Campbell sang, I guess I'm dumb. And, truly, a dumb person wouldn't say that. Like, Brian Wilson isn't dumb, and Dee Dee Ramone isn't dumb, and Lou Reed fucking ain't dumb. And but there are certain types of intelligence, and I think that some people aren't able. I wouldn't be able to fly a plane. There's all sorts of things I wouldn't be able to do. I wouldn't be able to be an accountant. I mean, there's a million things I can't do. I don't even know how to fucking ride a bike. So, am I dumb? I'm pretty sure I'm not. So, and sometimes I feel dumb, but I'm gonna say, I think I'm just gonna flatter myself. I think part of being smart is understanding that, yeah, sometimes you're dumb, and also understanding that you have fucking limitations. And just because you're great at one thing doesn't mean that you're gonna be. I mean, that's the intellectual arrogance of Bobby Fischer, right? In his later years, when he was exiled out in Iceland, and obsessed with, the quote unquote the Jews and all of that, Bobby Fischer said a lot of wild fucking shit. But the one thing that he said was this very haughty, I'm not a chess genius, I am a genius who plays chess. I could be a genius in all these other fields. And yet Bobby Fischer couldn't really do much of fucking anything. He couldn't even join a cult properly, right? So Bobby Fischer, genius. Bobby Fischer also was a fucking Holocaust denier. So that's not that genius, right? So he was a genius he was a monomaniacal genius. But that doesn't, genius is an odd thing, and genius is not, or intelligence. There's lots of different kinds of genius, lots of different kinds of intelligence. And I think intelligence probably lasts a lifetime. I think genius comes and goes. I think genius, part of genius, some of that's God-given. It's where God-given meets extremely hard work. Muhammad Ali was a genius at boxing, and was a genius at being able to come up with things to do in the ring, and was a genius at pulling his head back away from punches, which is lesson 101 of what you should never do. So Ali could do genius shit, but Ali also was sparring, whatever. Ali sparred I forget what it was, 10,000 rounds or something, and was doing that from the time that he was 12. I think it's the combination of those things, and I think it's hard to quantify a lot of this stuff. And Reed is smart, but yeah, there's something, and I mean, the fact that he was into William Burroughs and into Allen Ginsberg and in the New York avant-garde, and then he just really liked, he really liked Clyde McPhatter, and but that's not dumb either. You know what I mean? Like he loved. He loved rock and roll was always considered dumb music or teenage music. But it isn't dumb. It's a different kind of intelligence. It's a different kind of understanding the world. And Rock and Roll Hard is a great song, but but I do have to say, at its core, it's fucking hilarious. It is a very funny song. And there's a joy to it. There's something it's almost like telling a dirty joke. Right? Or like being younger and see nudie pictures or something. There's a gleefulness in sort of talking about yourself like that, or putting it out there like that, right? There's I've used this phrase before, Ferdy Pacheco, a piquant naughtiness in sort of putting it out there about yourself like that I really admire Reed for, and in its own way is as courageous as doing Coney Island Baby, though it's really funny and there's irony and there's all this other stuff going on, and you've got that fucking riff, and he sounds great. I will also throw in, I think probably everybody knows this already, but Clive Davis wanted this to be the big hit single of the album, and he wanted to put strings on it, and Reed refused. And this was apparently the beginning of the end with him and Clive. And someday when I review the Bells, which will be way in the future, maybe next year, maybe the year after that, Reed gets really negative about Clive Davis. And then never spoke of him ever again, of course. But yeah, and interestingly, that becomes the best. Reed's in a few movies here and there. He's wasted. Who was that ridiculous girl? The Prozac Diaries. Oh boy, Reed wasn't given much to do in that movie, but Reed basically plays himself in Blue in the Face. Which, if you've never seen it, god damn it, go do it. But Reed's best acting, truly great acting, the same way when you watch the Man Who Fell to Earth, you're like, wow, Bowie can fucking act. Or the Basquiat movie, fuck, Bowie really can. Bowie's really good at this. If Bowie never made a record, you'd be like, wow, check this fucking guy. Who is this guy? Reed's fucking performance in Paul Simon's movie. And now I just remembered, is it not One from the Heart? Or is that the name of it? No, One from the Heart is Francis Ford Coppola. Been on a Coppola kick lately. Hold on, I'm actually gonna... One Trick Pony, that's what it is. One Trick... I knew there was a one in there. Reed as the, gross manipulative record producer, and One from the Heart is amazing. That's not a terribly good movie. Paul Simon is not a leading man, okay? So it's not a great movie. However, the scenes with Reed, where Reed is trying to convince him to put strings on what will be his big hit single, and Paul Simon's character saying, "Oh, I want to make a ballsy record," and Reed's like, "River Deep Mountain High had strings. That's a ballsy record." And just the look on his face, the suppressed, I'm gonna get you, all behind the eyes, that's a fuck. Reed could have been an actor. If Reed didn't want to make, and he always said his stage performances and singing on albums was acting, and that he writes the parts for himself. And I believe it, because goddamn. And it is interesting that he basically turned the thing with Clive Davis into his scenes in One Trick Pony. Interesting. So anyway, that's side one. We will flip the record over. Things begin with the instrumental Chooser and the Chosen One. First instrumental since, I forget whatever, but Velvet Underground stuff. But did Reed have enough songs to fill out an album? Clearly not. Was he improvising in the studio? Clearly. And this is, I feel, indicative of that. That being said, it's a perfectly serviceable instrumental. And again, I think with the kind of buzzing synthesizer stuff that Fanfare is doing, and Marty Fogel's saxophone, again, kind of points the way to what winds up happening with the Bells, which, as great as Street Hassle is, I feel the Bells is kind of the ultimate album of that period, and the ultimate everyman band album. So it's Reed at a lyrical and conceptual peak, and the band at a playing peak. And this points the way towards it. So it's a perfectly serviceable instrumental. It's fine. It is interesting to hear Reed do some acoustic guitar fills, some kind of almost sort of twirling, semi-psychedelic kind of guitar interjections. That's cool. And then we get to Senselessly Cruel, which is Reed on piano. Rudimentary. He wanted a rudimentary piano, so he played it himself. And Senselessly Cruel. So one of the weird quirks of Reed is he occasionally would get fixated on very specific ideas. And in some cases, there are stories where he would get extremely passionate about these highly specific ideas, to the point where people would find it funny and they would laugh at it. It would be unintentionally funny, and they would laugh at him, and then he would get all the more upset because he was being really serious. So and in some cases, the more serious he would get, the more unintentionally funny it would become, which is something I can certainly relate to. So one of his highly specific things is, if you ever wondered about that line in Berlin about don't forget hire a vet, hiring Vietnam vets was one of Reed's like social causes. That was something he believed very strongly in, and apparently would get out of nowhere really earnest about it and would go on long-winded things about it. And people would be like, they found it so weird and so highly specific that would be the thing that he would focus upon. And that found its way into a lyric. Along that is the line about acquired taste. And Reed mentioned in an interview in '76 when promoting the album that he pointed that lyric out specifically, saying, "There is no such thing as acquired taste. You either have taste or you do not." And as late in the game as the reissue, Reed was still banging on that particular drum. That was apparently an idea that was fixed in his mind, and that's the first thing he pointed out as being the best lyric on the album. How someone's mind works, it is always a mystery. But and I don't know that I fully agree with that. I agree with it in some respects, that some things are forged by birth, but I do think that you can learn, and I do think that you can expand your taste. If nothing else, you can learn to have an appreciation of things. So I don't know that I don't know that I fully agree with him on that personally. But at any rate, Senselessly Cruel is, it takes kind of the psychology of a million early rock and roll and blues songs. It's pretty conventional subject matter of, you treated me bad and one day you're going to be sorry. And, I like the song. I've always liked the song, but it's not a particularly great piece of writing. I would say it's something of a pot boiler. Again, though, the backing vocals, Reed's serving as his own, perhaps, Belmonts, knocks it out. Amazing. Like, they're great. They're great backing vocals. But the song, the rudimentary piano, it's a jaunty gallop. It's a rhythmic pattern that you don't really see very often with Reed. So I like the song. Again, there is kind of a lightness to it and a swing and a sense of humor to it that I think you need on this album, and I think kind of punctuates this album well. And then we get to Claim to Fame, which is sort of a jam, but Senselessly Cruel isn't terribly well developed. Claim to Fame really isn't well developed. There's a couple interesting phrases. There's a couple sort of penetrating moments. The band plays really, really well. Fogel in particular does a great job of sort of corralling everything. But it is an underdeveloped song, and Reed particularly doesn't have a ton of ideas that I don't like dislike the song, but there's also not all that much to sort of say about it. Like I said, it's good for the band. We'll get to how it comes off live later. We're sort of building to that, I think. And so Claim to Fame, probably the weakest song here so far. That or Chooser and The Chosen One. And then we get to Vicious Circle. And Vicious Circle is another of the four. This is now the third dramatic ballad, and again, fanfara on sort of the synthesizer or ARP. I don't really know the difference. Actually, I take that back. This actually might be the Hammond. Now that I'm thinking about it, this might be the Hammond. And I think it is, of the four drama atmosphere ballads, heavy heaving atmosphere, it's probably the least. I think that in some respects it's an effective portrait of somebody kind of, sort of maybe in like the Warhol kind of world, who's adrift. But the sort of half-cocked nature of some of the lyrics, again, it sounds improved, maybe to its detriment, and it does. I mean, I've always thought that this album is front-loaded, and again, it kind of talks a little bit about. I talked about this before, where I think the sequencing of this album, I think you could resequence this album much more effectively. I mean, you could have Follow the Leader as a side opener and then set up, you know what I mean? Like, so, I do wonder what a resequenced version of this album looks like. Because Vicious Circle is a good song, not a great song. But it's just, as the fourth song on side 2, and that's one of the things. I think that this album was so slammed for such a long time and so just disregarded that the people, and there have been a number of you who who like this album and who have mentioned to me that they like this album. I think that for me, the one thing, and I found it happening yet again, because I probably listened to this album maybe 15, 20 times before sitting down to review it. I struggled with the sequence every single time. By this point in the album, listening to it all the way start to finish, and not in an environmental way. By this point in the album, I'm starting to kind of feel it. So that, like I said, I like Vicious Circle, and again, we'll talk about it live shortly. But I think different sequencing would benefit the song greatly. And then we get to A Sheltered Life. So another sort of quasi-novelty number, another, like I Believe in Love, like Rock and Roll Heart, this sort of weird alien version of how people communicate. And like what comes off as humor and what comes off as irony, and it is such an odd performance. But I first knew of A Sheltered Life from the Peel Slowly in C box set from the Velvet Underground. And this is from a snatch of pre-second album demos. So there is no reason, truly a little classic. It's All Right the Way That You Live, another great song. I'm Not Too Sorry Now That You're Gone, love it. And then Here She Comes Now, which made its way onto the second album. But tucked in there is A Sheltered Life. And actually, it's A Sheltered Life here, and it is Sheltered Life here. Now, Sheltered Life here, the Velvet Underground version, is glorious. It's really funny. It's really smart. It's like an American version of what the Kinks would have been doing. That sort of music, sort of quasi sort of musical, cod jazz. It has a kazoo solo. It's very funny. It's very self-referential. It's great, and the lyrics are really, really, really funny, and I love it. And it's just, as a complete piece, it's fantastic. And if you at all like that sort of Kinks, like sort of something happened to me yesterday, sort of sense of humor, a very nudge and a wink sort of humor. The Small Faces kind of did some of that too. It's perfect, and it really kind of, I love hearing like an American version of that, right? Here, Sheltered Life it's almost as if Reed remembered the song but couldn't fully remember the lyrics. The lyrics it's a fully composed set of lyrics, and they're perfect. They're great. They're really funny. It's like someone half remembering it. And it's almost like he was like, yeah, no, I know the song. I'll just do it. But then he like doesn't remember all of it. So the one verse, what I have always referred to as the much verse, or the too much verse, he uses the word much like 3 or 4 times in one verse. Like he's filling phonetic spaces. And that is one of the things with some of these songs on side 2, where, and I mean, there's a little bit of that on Ladies Pay and You Wear It So Well also, of Reed, because a lot of this is so loose and improv, he is filling phonetic spaces, whereas he normally would have actual written lyrics. So, as a set of lyrics, I wish that he maybe would have replicated what he had done years before with the Velvet Underground. However, that being said, kind of along the same lines as Follow the Leader. If you think of this as just apple, not even apples to oranges, or apples to apples, if you think about it in terms of mayonnaise to Volkswagens, this is fucking fantastic, and I love it. And I love it as part of a trio. You have one of the things that I do like about this album is I like that you have these sort of recurring elements. So you have the recurring humor elements, you have the recurring dramatic sort of atmospheric ballads aspect, you have the backing vocals aspect, you have these great bass lines from Bruce Yaw aspect, you have the fanfara synthesizer melding with the vocal saxophone aspect. Like you have Reed's guitar periodically popping up as a predominant, important sonic force in the album. So there's one of the things I do love is I love the different threads and how all of this forms an overall gestalt as a listening experience. And again, that's why I don't want to be too negative about this album, right? Because if it was a bad album or a weak album by anybody else's standards, it wouldn't have any of those elements. Do you know what I mean? It would fail. Like, Reed is able to set all of these things up, especially in such a loose, semi-improvisational atmosphere. He's able to throw all these things together, these different elements together, and realize them, and it coheres into this whole. So, and that is its own, like, high-functioning level of artistry as he's producing it. So anyway, Sheltered Life has, again, kind of like I Believe in Love, like this weird alien vocal, like it's so alien and trying to sound like these humans on this planet Earth. And it's still really funny. It's just funny in a different way. And then you've got these insane, or is it 2 or 3 sax breaks of these insane double-tracked sax solos. So it's like bizarro world version of the Ornette Coleman free jazz thing. Like 2 different saxophones on the way, and like both are like fucked. Like they are just fucked. And so the sort of the cod jazz faux hipster, like Maynard G. Krebs joke vibe of it just highlights that, because these are falling down the floor, what the fuck saxophone solos, and there's 2 of them. And it happens again, and I don't remember. But I don't remember if there's 2 or 3 sax breaks. I think maybe there's just 2, but both of them are like, let's say it's both, is like, what the fuck, and that is highly effective. And again, it's a weird alien AI version of hipster jazz bow 50s. I'm with it, man. Like it's fucking weird. And it's like a narc trying to, like a 50s narc trying to go to a coffee shop, daddy-o. Like it's so fucking odd. And I can't help but love it, cuz why? Like fucking why? So and the lyrics, I mean, again, it's self-deprecating humor. It's Lou Reed putting his face, just like the album cover, right? Putting his face right in front of you, and I've never taken dope, and I've never taken drugs. He knows exactly what he's doing. So I love this Sheltered Life. I love the Velvet Underground Sheltered Life. It is just that they are different things, just like Follow the Leader. So, you know, sometimes I very strongly prefer, when it comes to Velvet Underground versions of these songs, sometimes I very strongly prefer one to the other. And every now and again, it's like the 2 instances on this album, you really do love both, you know, completely for what each one is. And then all of that kind of goes out the window, and all of these other elements kind of vanish. And we get down to the last song on the album, and that is Temporary Thing. And Temporary Thing, I think you could make the case that this is the best thing on the album. It's, you know, it is, in this sense, all 4 of the Everyman, well, there's 5, but really The Bells is the climax for me. Like, Growing Up in Public is kind of an epilogue record. So I feel, yes, there are 5, but I feel like there are sort of 4 main or real Everyman Band albums, and each one has a complete, like, great fucking closer, or you know, or like there's a sense of gravity to each one. And Temporary Thing is the most dramatic of the dramatic atmospheric ballads, and the most Spectre. And what Fogel's doing is the most Spectre kind of stuff, and what Fanfara's doing is the most Spectre kind of stuff, and what Michael Sikorsky is doing is the most Spectre kind of stuff, right? And there is that thing that happens on the best Spectre stuff of all the elements just blending together, and it's just one heaving, heaving sonic impression that's being made again and again and again and again and again. And over that, you have Reed, who, again, this feels really improvised, but it's raw, confrontational, guerrilla theater, like living theater performance. And it's really primal, and I mean, to the point where he's almost making animal sounds at one point, and at one point he starts to laugh, like, derisively. It's a really unguarded vocal performance, and it's really, really powerful. The lyrics, again, there's not much happening to the lyric, but you don't need it with this much drama and power in the band, like barely held back power. And I will say, by the way, the fact that the band, and we'll get into this when we start talking about live stuff, but the fact that the band the dynamic range of the Everyman Band is truly a remarkable thing. The idea that they could do Spectre level impact and like hold it in and be real tight, and then that they could be as explosive or as improvisational. It's a remarkable blend of elements, and really, I think, kind of, it's the other stuff that sort of comes close to that might have been Zappa, of the late 70s, like the Zappa, like when Adrian Belew was around and stuff, like they had the ability to do that. And in a really different context. I mean, instrumentally, it's completely different. But the Rolling Thunder, what Dylan was doing with Rolling Thunder, that it's interesting that at this time, they all kind of, and Bowie too, like the stage band, and that there is this looseness, and that each of those bands could be exploratory, and then they could really converge into an arrangement really powerfully and tightly. It's interesting that there's this sort of widescreen virtuosity that these different bands have at this time, and that is something of a common thread at this time, and the music feels like all of it's in like sense surround, and that's a testament to the greatness of each of these bands. And they all have their own interesting specific flavors. They all they don't sound alike, particularly. But this is just a great performance. Again, you don't need a ton of text in the lyrics when you have something this raw and this like coming at you. It is just a great performance. And Reed talked about that, where when Reed said, when he was doing interviews for this album, and he said, "My records are for real. This is the most for real thing on here." And this ties everything together, and I think it gives gravity and grounding to the humor, the self-knowing stuff. And then one of the most important aspects of it are Reed's, again, call and response vocals with himself. These are the best backing vocals on the album. As a vocal arrangement, this is fantastic. His ability to sing with himself, and do like contrasting longer conventional background vocal lines, but again, then this not barking, but sort of gang chant call and response, it really works and is really, really, really effective as an additional sort of melodic element and sonic element. And then the other thing is right towards the end, because it's so much empty space and it's so, again, heaving inevitability, is there's these great percussion accents, and I'm not even sure what that is. I'm not sure if that's, like, speaking of Spector, like heavily mic'd castanets. I'm not sure what that is, or they're just banging on something, but those percussion accents are fucking perfect. And that's kind of what I mean, like how well produced this album is. Like every sonic aspect is amazing. And again, I just love that that's all Reed doing that with his voice. Like he's just so good at it. And it just sounds great. So Temporary Thing ends this album with a resounding fucking bang. And what's really interesting is right at the very end, right in the final, so it's 5 minutes 19, somewhere at 4 minutes 50 maybe, I don't know, somewhere in there, is the guitar enters, the sound generating guitar enters again. And between this and the Ladies Pay solo, it's part of what's interesting about that is that really does prefigure a lot of what Reed's guitar did in the 90s and beyond, where he's not really like playing licks or solos in a conventional sense. It really is these sort of droning tones and just sound generation. And you see a lot more of that from him. And certainly when I saw him in 96 and 2000, that's primarily what he's doing. But that's like what he's playing on Set the Twilight Reeling. And that's even kind of what he's doing as a counterpoint to Quine on that great Bottom Line video. So it is interesting that this is sort of the first time we have that, and the guitar just makes this brief appearance at the end, but it's just this jagged, nasty sort of playing that kind of breaks up into feedback. And between that and the saxes and the pianos and the physicality, it definitely gives an indication of what they were like on stage, and just their power and taste level as players. So great echoing end statement, really, really cool, interesting way to end the album. And that's it. That is Rock and Roll Heart. However, the video is definitely not going to end here because the band went on the Rock and Roll Heart tour. And the Rock and Roll Heart tour is kind of like how I spent so much of the first video of this series leading up to Coney Island Baby. This is the lead up to talking about the what the tour was like, and I'm particularly excited to get into all of that. So we will get to that right now. So one other thing I wanted to just say really quickly about Rock and Roll Heart is all the stuff about improvising in the studio and freestyling songs. You know, Reed had done that. He was drawing from that with Follow the Leader, making it an explicit thing. But there is a quote from him. And so we now know that thanks to the reissue that it was recorded, at least in August 26th, they were in the studio. I had a couple of songs before we went into the studio to record Rock and Roll Heart, but they changed, as I noted. The rest I wrote in the studio. It's much more fun that way. No, it isn't expensive because I'm very quick. He is. It took 27 days to record that album, including mixing. So that is, I just wanted to mention that. The other thing is, and I talked about this in the second video, the Nelson Slater Wild Angel album. So, which I don't have a copy of, but is excellent. Reed produced it. It's extremely worth hearing. I will put a link to it. And it's recorded with Reed's band in this time, plus Bob Kulick is back. So it's a lot more conventional sort of New York soul. If you want to say blue-eyed soul, it's kind of a lame-o, nondescriptive phrase, but if it works for you, fantastic. But this and this beautiful Garland Jeffries album, if you like Reed's music in this time, go check out both of these albums. Because they are both absolutely worth hearing. So anyway, we will now move along. Reed, and I would imagine maybe this immediately predates his recording of Rock and Roll Heart. There is the show that is out there at CBGB's. There were photos of it that I was dumbfounded by when I read the Victor Bachris book, or photo, I don't think it was photos, of Lou Reed, John Cale, and it's sort of split over these two pages. I don't know if you can see that. David Byrne, a very young David Byrne, pre-First Talking Heads album, and yes, Patti Smith, record at CBGB's. Most of the set are John Cale songs. Reed sticks to guitar, basically, but it is a really cool performance. I will put a link to that. There are two different recordings of it out there. I forget now what the differences are because it's been a while since I listened to those. I will also say here are more photos of Lou and Rachel, and then Lou and Diana Ross. So the story that he tells about Diana Ross being very nice to him on Take No Prisoners, that's when they met. So, and that kind of easily segues into Reed's image at this time. Oh, also, the other funny thing with all the vocal arrangements and with Reed has struck up a friendship with Flo and Eddie. So at the end of '75, Reed performed on stage with Flo and Eddie. Hard to believe, but it happened. And then I think a couple of years later, when Flo and Eddie had a music show, it appears to be something of a kind of a knockoff of Rock Concert or the Midnight Special, or Don Kirshner's Rock Concert or the Midnight Special, or something like that. Or maybe they were guest hosting. I'm a little unclear, but they interview Reed, and it's a very they clearly get on with each other. It's a really interesting. You would never think that Mark and Howard and Lou Reed, especially '70s Lou Reed, would get on, and yet they do. Also, a little earlier than this, I've always wondered what those conversations were like. Reed looking very chummy with members of Lynyrd Skynyrd. I've always found that very interesting. The idea that Reed doesn't play nice with anybody, I don't think is particularly true. He was, because is it Mark? I always forget which one is which, but I think Mark is the one who's Mark Volman or no, is it Howard Kalin? Damn it, I'm getting them flipped around. Whoever, not the big guy with the isfro, but the shorter guy, who I forget which one is which right now, but he's a tough little motherfucker, and he's not going to put up with bullshit. So if Reed had tried to clown on him, he would have bit back. I want to say that might be Howard. Like, he doesn't screw around. So, like, I've seen interviews with him, and I listened to some podcast interviews with him. He's tough as nails. So, and doesn't suffer fools. So, it's funny to see Reed being that like chummy with those guys. So, just an interesting thing to note. So, anyway, Reed went out on tour, the Rock and Roll Heart Tour, from October to December of 1976. Now, in this reissue, also interesting. First of all, they say they asked, "What is the guy who did the interview, the photographer?" Yeah, Timothy Greenfield Saunders, who was one of Reed's buddies in his later years, did the interview, and he says, "What were you like? What was life in 1976 like for you?" And Reed says, "If you want to know what life was like for me then, I would naturally say, listen to this record. I was super lithe and virile," which I think goes a long way towards explaining things. But Reed going out on stage, this period of him, and I will, the Mick Rock photos for Coney Island Baby are some of the most iconic. I think this is Reed's most interesting period, at least up to this point, in terms of crafting an image. He later crafted the more sober, sensible version of himself in the 80s, and then there's the professorial version, which starts in the late 80s and just kind of carries through to the end, more or less. And as we now know, as he had health issues, I think the health issues determined that he became less and less expressive in interviews in the later years. But because it's actually pretty funny, like, he's pretty open in the 90s, like, surprisingly so. For all of the sort of professorialness, he actually is pretty funny and will tell some old stories and stuff. He's not like, that's not like beneath him. But this period, Reed, of sort of half Survivor, still half, not maybe the full. I think when he was in the Velvet Underground, people don't really have a sense of the Velvet Underground. Reed told some really amazing stories in his later years of what living day to day in the Velvet Underground was like, and how difficult it was, and how food was hard to come by, and how they would sleep in the all-night theaters in Times Square because they sometimes just didn't have anywhere else to sleep. So you look at them in the black leather jackets and sort of how tough and stark they look, and they look like they could fit into a more violent version of some of the Ouija photographs. Maybe some of the people carrying out the crimes, even, perhaps. They were tough. They were tough, and they had to be. And it wasn't easy to survive, and it wasn't easy to survive in that particular subculture in New York City, or really kind of anywhere, but particularly there. So I think that the sort of evolved punk thing, and I mean punk kind of in both senses of the word, I think that, but now he's an adult, he's survived, he's grown into himself, he is no longer synthesizing his language and creating his language, he's exploring his language, he's exploring everything that he has laid in front of himself. I find this all very intriguing. I find this really interesting. I find that sort of midpoint evolution between when he has one foot still very much kind of in the underworld and the subculture, but he's also like super on top of it, and he's able to go on national tours and start to become something of an elder statesman. I find that a really, really interesting and intriguing balance, and to be perfectly honest, that's actually part of what I love about the Rolling Stones by the time we get into the Some Girls period. I like the idea. Like, I find that balance very, very, very compelling. It's not all the way Outlaws, and it's not all the way like the Steel Wheels tour. It's sort of right in this interesting range where they're somehow able to balance all of that and be these kind of, soul survivors, to put it in Mick terminology. I love all of that, and I think that Reed's ability to craft an image, and I think that's another extension of his art. That's not PR. That's not marketing. It is the visual analog of the music. It's fucking brilliant. To go along with that, for this tour, Reed, and I first saw footage of this in a theater in New York when they premiered the Lou Reed American Masters. So this would have been 98. And I didn't know footage of this existed, and I was blown away. I'd read about it in books, I'd read about it in articles, but I couldn't get over how fucking unbelievably cool it looked in like actual footage. And that was, Reed had about 60 television sets, black and white television sets, that were no longer being used by New York State mental hospitals. He snatched all of these televisions up. Reed was obsessed with technology. He was obsessed with having as much of it sort of as he could in his New York apartment. And he would have, a lot of interviewers detail the strangeness of how he would have clock radios set to different times, slightly different times in the same apartment all throughout. So it might be 5:10, it might be 4:55, and he would just travel from room to room. But he had tape recorders and all different sorts of equipment. And he talks about it here. It's the most interesting part of with the televisions, how he would jack up the contrast, and that he needed slightly older television sets to be able to do that. And they laid them out. So the stage set of this tour is 60 television sets and the band playing. And that would give Reed all sorts of ability. They would put one television set to a local station. The other stuff was film stuff that either he had filmed or he had found. And they would put stuff together on loops. There would be closed circuit things. Sometimes it would go into close-ups of the faces. So and they would do closed circuit with it. So it would broadcast Reed's face. So that's actually what Mick Rock used as the basis for the artwork for this album. Why am I holding up the CD when I can hold up the album? So that's what's so cool about this. So that's why it looks like it's shot off a TV, because it's shot off a TV. It was directly related to the stage set. And this, I actually always thought just should have been the album cover. I think just this is the album cover, and maybe you could put some text over it. I actually like this better than this. Though this is still pretty goddamn cool. But that's truly iconic. That's beautiful. So anyway, all that to say that Reed on the 76 Rock and Roll Heart Tour, I think has as much depth to it and as much to investigate and learn about and love as Dylan's Rolling Thunder. It's and I just think you can drill into this period of the exploration and expansion of his language and just keep getting more and more and more from it. And the Rock and Roll Heart songs combined with the Coney Island Baby songs, that forms a body of songs that is absolutely fucking stunning and has an emotional, musical, and expressive range that you could kind of just do endless variations off of, and Reed does. The other thing that's interesting to note, while it is a relatively static set list, it does leave room. I find this so interesting. Sort of in the background of certain shows, and sometimes it starts to come to the fore. He starts bringing out Berlin. And that eventually happens more in 79. But Berlin is, the ghost or the shadow of Berlin is starting to emerge, especially with this band, especially with these players. These players, just one more time for reference, we have Fanfara on keyboards, we have Bruce Yaw on bass, Marty Vogel on sax, and Michael Sikorsky on drums. Reed is singing and playing guitar. And then on a couple shows, Ornette Coleman, trumpet player Don Cherry. the legendary Don Cherry. Now, I will briefly go into a couple things about this tour, because I think that this tour is the real rock and roll heart. This is rock and roll heart. The album is cool, and I like this album a lot. Sometimes I love it, kind of. I love things about it. But the real rock and roll heart is in the live show. Now, from October 29th, 1976, at the Orpheum in Boston. That show is out there. So from what I am able to put together is Arista paid for radio promo to do broadcasts of Reed shows in certain cities. So that is one of the reasons why there is all of a sudden a boom in Lou Reed bootlegs from around this time. Excuse me. So the Boston show is partially out there. That's the other problem. Nearly none of them are complete shows. It's infuriating. It's damn near impossible to get a complete show. So, but the Orpheum in Boston, it's out there. About 15 songs of it are out there. They would play very long shows. They would play a little over 2 hours every night. And there is a version of Kill Your Sons. I will be linking it below. It is some of the most impressive Texas Chainsaw Massacre post I Heard Her Call My Name slop, gore, freak out guitar playing that Reed ever did in his entire solo career. It is very cathartic and very intense and ugly in beautiful ways, if that makes sense. And hopefully, if you're this far deep in these Lou Reed videos, that will make sense to you. It is fucking unbelievable. So, and also, Bruce Yaw trying to steal the show. He's as great as Reed is on guitar. Bruce Yaw is right there with him. Really, really, really impressive. Then, at a few days later, November the 6th, at the Capitol Theater in Passaic, New Jersey, that one's filmed. That's the footage I would have seen in the American Masters. That was partially filmed. And that footage is... So I'm going to put up what I can. It's out there in a lot of different forms. It was edited to some degree, but that was shot on like the old closed circuit. So the thing that the thing that the all dialed up film is shot off of that Bob Gurn and his ex-wife shot, and it's like, I don't even know what they're called. They're not Super 8. They were like early VHS, but they're black and white, and there's this very weird sort of soap opera, that one, was it season 3 of The Twilight Zone, like that weird hyper real thing. It looks like that, and it's amazing. And like I said, that was the first footage I ever saw that tour, and I couldn't fucking believe it. They were playing Kicks. So Reed, in front of the banks of televisions, super, super, super thin, like this really tight shirt. He apparently would wear roughly the same clothes every night. Like this super tight shirt, just like cigarette at the microphone, like some weird alternate reality version of a 60s Sinatra meets I don't even know what. Like it's alternate reality stuff. It's a lounge singer or a jazz singer archetype, but taken into some bizarre avant-garde realm, and as a performance, and then all of a sudden lithe and virile. He's also very loose, and in the way that my wife commented once, we watched every Rolling Stones music video ever all the way through, and she commented on Mick's transition from the fluid dancing of the 60s to by the time it gets to like the Hang Fire video, she commented on how bird-like he is. She's like, it's very herky-jerky and like a tropical bird is how he moves, and I thought that was hysterical. Reed is like if Jagger had never become herky-jerky. So as great as the Stones are on the Some Girls tour, Jagger is like at some of his herky-jerkiest, that weird dance that he does where he's lifting his legs like a like it's like Mickey's Monkey, but fucking abstract expressionist and wrong, kind of. I'm making it sound cooler than it is. It's just like, what the fuck move? Like, what is that, Mick? Reed moves like, and he has sort of figured out like how to move his body and not play guitar, because he still looks awkward at 74. Like when he tries to be like a rock frontman. And I understand that part of the rock and roll animal is the sort of deconstruction and the staged weirdness of that. But he's like really in himself and of himself. And it's really beautiful to watch. Like when he does move and he's not just like very like affected, super cool, like hands on the mic and like cigarette, like when he's not just that and he's actually moving, like he seems like he is completely and totally in his body in a way that he never would have been before as a performer, and then probably never was again, because once we get to the 80s and he puts a guitar back on, the guitar is then just on forever until some of the stuff at the very end. Now, back in olden days, I talked about my second girlfriend, the one who made the Virgin Machine mixtape. I talked about her, and funnily enough, we had been broken up for a little bit, and I became friends with one of her other ex-boyfriends. Pretty weird. Never thought that would happen. We would hang out and talk and stuff entirely independent of her. And what was really weird, we never talked about her. That never came up. We had a lot of common interests, and we both really liked James Joyce, both loved Lou Reed, both loved John Lennon. We had a lot to talk about. And he was a literal genius. He was intimidatingly intelligent. Anyway, he had a lot of Lou Reed bootlegs. He was nice enough to make a mixtape for me, and which I looked for and I can't find. I'm not really sure what became of it. But he had put stuff from 76 and 77, live stuff from them, or in 75. And that was the first time, that would have predated when I saw the footage of Kicks in New York. But that was my first indication of what the 75, 76 shows are like. And that was like shocking. I couldn't believe how otherworldly in its fucking genius it was. And it was kind of like around the time same time I would have had gotten Biograph, and it was kind of the same thing of first hearing the live 66 stuff, that version of I Don't Believe You, She Acts Like We've Never Met, or the Rolling Thunder Romance in Durango stuff, or Isis, that version of fucking Isis, right? Like, it was as like, oh my god, this is out there somewhere, like there's it, and it sounds like this is how they were playing. And so trying to find shows from this period became on and off for the next couple years something of a sort of a sport for me. So I would have bought this one, Banging on My Drums. It's called Banging on My Drums. We've got some of the Mick Rock photos, Coney Island Baby on the back, right? Like, there's the two sides of the Coney Island Baby sort of image, right? And Reed in this period, you know? And I was like, oh, I snatched this up right away. There was a really weird record store, I forget where it was, in Chicago. It's long gone now. I mean, I don't think it made it to the mid-2000s. But it was run by these two old guys, and they loved me because, like, they would want to talk about Bob Dylan and Neil Young with me. But they had good prices, and they were good guys. But alas and alack, this show, unfortunately, and this is Reed being interviewed for Rock and Roll Heart, so I've seen this photo in like a million different books. But this show is primarily from 77, so it doesn't fall into the realm of this book. And then it fills it out with a couple things from 1975, from shows in 75. But this for a while was one, and then at, I forget what the record store was, but it was a really bunk-ass record store that every now and again you would get lucky. And that was when I got this, Leave Me Alone. Look at that. Look at how cool that is, huh? So I was really excited because this was a bona fide 1976 show. Look at that. Look at that. I mean, Mick Rock, unbelievable. And did I mention, yeah, I did mention that Mick Rock did the photos for Rock and Roll Heart. So pretty cool, right? I was really excited. And then we got a band listing here. And this band listing's unbelievable because it's 100% right. Except for Lou Reed. The following people were playing in 75 and 76. Lou Reed, John Prakash. It's Prakash John. So I can't even get that right. The bass player from the fucking Rock and Roll Animal period. Penty Whitey Glan on drums. So I don't know if whoever put this together was an early proponent of bath salts. I'm not sure how they would have arrived. I'm not sure how you turn Michael Sikorsky into Penty Whitey Glan. And then Michael Fanfara. So 2 out of 4, and then missing everybody else, sucks. So yeah. But I don't know what the fuck this lineup is. It's fucking, like, stupid as hell. But this is the November 16th show in Albany. And then it is filled out with some performances from October 23rd in Akron. And then the rest is filled out from 1975. This is an odd bootleg. It's a strange one, in part because some of it is absolutely transcendental. The recording is weird. It's very soft sounding. It's very heavy on Michael Fanfara's keyboards, and it's it lacks sort of the atmosphere. The other thing is, Reed isn't really going for it vocally as much. So it's an odd, and of course this is the closest approximation there is to a full show. A lot of it's exceptional, and if you were seeing this in Albany or in Akron, you would think, oh my god, this is the best goddamn thing I've ever seen. This is incredible. For a long time, this was my gold standard, okay? Especially this version of Kicks. Holy crap, loved it, unbelievable. Kicks during this period is like the thing, you know. It's what you're excited to hear. However, this has long now been usurped by the availability of some of the other stuff that's out there. So if you ever happen to see this, there's versions of this. Weirdly, this artwork has been repurposed for some Lou Reed Live 1976 video, so you see this artwork up on YouTube, but it doesn't really bear relation to the actual content. So I'm not fully sure what that's all about. But what I really want to get into is and sort of what the point of all this is at some point at the record store, Secondhand Tunes, where I got my beloved John Lennon bootlegs, and I've talked about in other videos, I've actually thought about doing an on location. Like, I've actually thought about, because that store is still there, I've actually thought about hitting the guy up and maybe interview him. It's a different guy now, because I mean the store's existed for 40 something years in different iterations. I've actually thought about doing a Rich Talks Records on location. I don't know. It's an idea that I entertain. But this, at some point from there, I got this. This was in the imports section one day. Super Golden Radio Shows number 26. And we have a wrong photo. Rock and Roll Animal era photo. Not even, like late period Rock and Roll Animal. The Super Show. And this is Lou Reed in Los Angeles, 1976, on December the 1st. And it is 9 songs. It is very, very truncated, as you can see. And this is certainly of a period. It is a straight up CDR. And I don't know if this is going to come up on the camera. You can actually see the 1976 through the disc. So I haven't tried playing this thing in a long time. I have no idea how this would even sound. But this had the version of Kicks from that mixtape. I recognized it right away. And I was kind of blown away that I thought I now had the whole show. This thing sounds fucking terrible. Not just because it is a poor, very poor quality CDR, but just the actual sound of it. Like the you know the Bjork's There's More to Life Than This, where she like there's the like it sounds like she's like running off into the restroom or into like the like maybe out to the alley or something, like it plays around with the sound. This just sounds like that at various times, like songs just start getting real quiet, like it's fucking gnarly. But you put up with it because it was so white hot and fucking awesome. You put up with it. So I had a weird vision of what this time was, and you would get it in fits and starts of how awesome it is, but then how, you know, how not awesome it is. Now, on the foreign Lou Reed touring page and band members page that I referenced before, they had Lou Reed bootlegs listed. And in 1999, a very young, naive, 21-year-old Rich messaged the domain, the guy who owned the domain, and like put, like I made like a trade offer or an offer to like put a check in the mail. Like I totally thought I could hit this guy up and like get copies of some of these bootlegs. Like, could you make a recording for me or anything? You know, could I buy them from you? Later on, I came to find out, within a year or two, I came to find out that was actually a pretty normal practice. But just sort of cold emailing somebody was probably not the way to do it. There, I wound up on all sorts of email listservs and that's how I got some of the weirder, more specific bootlegs that I have. I would get these long lists every couple months, you know, from somebody, and you know, or from a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend sort of thing. Like, oh, I know a guy. And so at any rate, but I was just going about it like in the most dumbass way possible. But there was a bootleg out there, and I might put it in the JPEG, we'll see, called Claim to Fame. And that became the gold standard for the December 1st, 1976 show in LA at the Roxy. And it turns out that show was also incomplete. Not as incomplete as this shit. Like, toss this in the bin. I just hold on to this because for personal, you know, reasons. But Claim to Fame became the gold standard, and for a while, anytime I wanted to listen to this show, that's like the thing that's on YouTube. However, there's actually more. There's actually more, but also, however, the entire show itself is still incomplete. So I am going to focus on two shows from this tour that I really want to talk about. And in the last video, I talked about Imagine With Me, that Lou Reed had put out a live album in 1975, and I directed you to whichever show that was. I forget which one it is. Maybe it was Boston. I'm forgetting now. Or Philadelphia. I forget. Anyway, imagine further with me that there is a Lou Reed live album from 1976. Because if you are a fan of Lou Reed, if you love this period, if you love the Everyman Band, if you love Take No Prisoners, I certainly do. This is truly essential, and I kind of can't overstate it enough. It might be the best, other than the Velvet Underground live at the Gymnasium. This might be the best live recording that Lou Reed ever did. This is him at a peak, at a performance peak, where he is so fully in control of himself and the band is like fucking lethal. So this is the reason I stress all of this. This is the real Rock and Roll Heart. If you love Rock and Roll Heart, the album, you love Coney Island Baby, you love the Everyman Band, you love What's to Come with Street Hassle and the Bells and all of that, you need this in your life, right? Okay, like you need to have this. So I'm going to be putting links to things. I'm going to do my goddamn best. So check out the links below, because when I put this video together, finally, this video has been shot here and there a lot, bits and bobs. But when I finally pull it all together, the links are going to be really, really, really well thought out. So don't fuck around and go check out the links. I can't stress that enough. So we are going to talk about, so the whole show doesn't exist. However, there are better versions of it than even Claim to Fame. As awesome as Claim to Fame is, you can do one better, okay? Because by this point, by the time they hit Los Angeles, and Don Cherry joins them, I think he had first joined them the night before, and then, in, where was it? In Santa Monica, I think is when he did his first show with them. But by this point, they are, I'm going to say, the best band in the world. The other thing I will say is, if you love Take No Prisoners, think of it this way. Take No Prisoners is like, the comparison would be like 70s Muhammad Ali, right? It's 15 rounds, it's brutal, but he triumphs in the end. But it's a battle of attrition, okay? This is 60s Ali. This is the guy that throws 42 punches in 5 seconds, and like this is a different animal. They're very similar animals in some ways, but it really, really has its own character, and the vibe is very, very different. You know, the Lou Reed of 78, 79 is very different than the Lou Reed of 1976. I think a lot went down in that period of time, and forced a lot even more soul searching and retrospection. There's still a glowing vibrancy and shock of the new to these performances. But also, they had now been on tour long enough and had felt each other out long enough, because there is sometimes a tentativeness to the Akron Albany. But by this point, they are fucking lethal. They are the best band on the planet. They are motherfuckers by this point. So we are going to talk about this show. It was broadcast on KMET. Depending on the version that you have, I'm going to be trying to avoid that version that is out on YouTube that has DJ interruptions. And the intro jam, he talks over parts of it, and then at one point they're trying to do a station break, and he's like, "This is just classic Lou Reed." Like, fuck off, man. I don't want to fucking hear you. So anyway, so we're going to run through the part that is recorded. So the intro jams would change truly every night. It truly was a jam. These guys were fucking jazz. This was a jazz band. This is a jazz band playing rock and roll. This is fusion in a way that is far more rock and far more angular and adventurous than a lot of quote-unquote jazz rock, and it's not as chops based. It is about emotions and done for effect far more than displays of virtuosity. The virtuosity is totally an afterthought. So the intro jam is amazing. I made notes, so I'm just going to read those. Furious jazz fusion all over the place, and excellent chorus skating guitar playing from Lou Reed. Like, Reed has put the guitar back on. He wouldn't play it through the whole show, but he would periodically put it on. This is halfway between the sound generating stuff he would do in the 90s and his, wiry, gnarly fucking mastery of what he did in the Velvet Underground. There is a beautiful version of Sweet Jane. I have Free Jazz Stadium Rock. Fogel and Cherry form together as this beautiful duetting entity, and it is truly, truly something to behold. And then we get into I Believe in Love. Don and Marty sound like some Italian wedding march, New Orleans funeral, and klezmer 1920s music of a past that never existed, All the irony is stripped off this song, and it is as life-affirming as Sweet Jane. It is huge and powerful, and Fogel goes nuts at the end, while Bruce Yaw just swings his way through it. This is jazz like you've never heard, and Yaw is fucking truly swinging. It is amazing. It rocks. It rolls as much as it rocks. It rolls more than Lou Reed ever had before or ever again. And then we get Lisa Says, glistening piano-led intro with more twisted metal guitar. Great vocal improvs from Lou Reed, which I actually, as I had listened to more shows for this video, I found out weren't really improvs. It was just how he was singing it on this tour. And Don Cherry, during the Why Am I So Shy part, the sort of super quaint American Ray Davies sort of Why Am I So Shy, goes into this melody that is basically just big band territory. It's like Bix Beiderbecke stuff. It's amazing. And it again has this weird, out of time evocation, because it's super modern and it's super of the now and very hip in New York in 70s. But also it is doing some really weird time traveling in real time in front of you. There is a long and winding saxophone and trumpet outro that is absolutely beautiful. And Reed sings it like it's ultra expressive. It's soul music from somebody who is not a soul singer, you know. It is a virtuoso performance. Then we go into Kicks. Kicks is coming in at around 9 minutes. It begins with a fucking feedback blast from the depths, right? It hits the groove, and sometimes, so like the Passaic version, like Reed builds it up, but here he just gets fucking right down to business, and the vocal intensity just goes up from there. It was almost as if he couldn't wait to get to this song that night, and like he had to sing it. So it is totally urgent. There is a Marty Fogel solo that is incredible, and Yaw is playing beautiful cascading counterpoints on the bass, and then Don Cherry does his solo, and everyone drops out, so it's drums and Don Cherry, and then it builds back up in like variations, and just keeps like threatening to come to a lurching stop, and yet it continues on in its own momentum. It is one of the most dramatic and great performances that Lou Reed ever gave. The band is, I mean, this is like the best performance from the best band, and even in this shit sound quality, it was the real fucking deal. It was unbelievable. So from there, in verse of Coney Island Baby, we go into She's My Best Friend. It is a stately intro and pace. Marty Fogel, again, is amazing. And Reed turns the choruses into just this, like, headlong rush of screaming intensity. And, like, everything is fucking in his voice. Like, it is the summation of life and death. It is so intense. And just when you think the band is starting to cool down, like, they like, the push and pull and the tension of She's My Best Friend, and it goes into depths that the album wouldn't be able to go into. Do you know what I mean? And that's part of what's so impressive about listening to all of these different shows, is how malleable this music was, and how it would change on a nightly basis, and how truly they were a jazz band. They were truly a rock and roll jazz band, and that the music really could go into different shapes and different forms. Absolutely incredible. Then we have I'm Waiting for the Band. There is a great intro and a great build, and then it drops and cools the overall intensity, but it is still remains quietly intense. There is great syncopated guitar playing, rhythm guitar playing that Reed throws in that I wish he had done more of. There is more Don and Marty duetting. There is more jazz drumming, jazz sort of syncopated breakdown stuff that is amazing. with Sikorsky playing incredible rhythmic variations, and I think it comes in around 12 minutes, and they just leave these long, beautiful improv spaces. Again, the phenomenon of Fogel and Cherry is like, it sounds like they've been playing together for like 10 years. Like and I was talking about the Fanfara Fogel Reed trio. This is then like a quartet, and with those two able to just branch off and basically just be a band on their own. Then we go into one of the most unlikely highlights, over 10 minutes of Sheltered Life of all fucking songs. So irony goes out the window. It is now more of an impish character study, and this is the cod jazz and the tongue-in-cheek and the faux jazzbo Maynard G. Krebs thing goes out the fucking window. And this is another outside of time setting. Weimar Republic youth dreaming of what it would be like to live in New York. Beautiful piano. Absolutely beautiful piano from Fanfara. Amazing Don Cherry solo. The phrases he plays are incredible and basically form like new essential counter melodies in the song that should have always been there. And then he can go into like exploratory, like spaz stuff, basically like the trumpet equivalent of feedback, or the pocket trumpet equivalent of feedback. And then Marty Fogel comes in and expands upon that. And he just keeps going and going. And Reed, interestingly, becomes more of an MC. So Reed just periodically comes back in, repeats the cycle of the chorus, and then Fogel goes back out again. And it's so interesting to hear Reed in that context. And eventually the band drops out, and it's just Fogel playing for minutes, and with the audience clapping along. And then even the clapping stops, and Fogel just goes and goes and goes with total like a cappella silence, and then the band comes back in for one more round of the chorus, and it is fucking epic. And in its own way, in its own weird way, it's as rewarding as Kicks. Sheltered Life of all songs is a fucking masterpiece. You owe it to yourself to hear it if you haven't heard it before. Now, then there's a snatch of rock and roll heart stuff. So You Wear It So Well is intimate, like hearing a man muttering his inner thoughts to himself on the subway, complemented by Marty Fogel's circular repeated sax lines. And then we go right into, so that brings it down, but is still, because of Reed, intense, but it's held back. Then we go into Claim to Fame, which is a lot more sort of 50s knock-a-block, early rock and roll sounding, really, really beautiful. It's played with a lot more rhythmic conviction and verve than what's on the album. And then there's Vicious Circle. So what I have is more expansive, and the band is barely suppressed, which gives Reed room to give a powerful and expressive performance. The coyness and intimation on the album is gone, and it becomes an urgent expression of concern, bewilderment, and disgust. Then we go into Walk on the Wild Side. Walk on the Wild Side is over 10 minutes. Again, Don and Marty go off for long periods. Tempo-wise, it's very, very, and rhythmic-wise, it's very, very held back. But Don Cherry, again, he goes up the octave and plays beautiful variations on the main melody. And Reed, again, loses himself in the vocal performance. It's really amazing just to hear how much he totally gives himself over as a vocalist. And then Bruce Yaw is also fucking fantastic on this. And then we get into Coney Island Baby, and that's the last version, that's the last song that's on Claim to Fame, and that's basically where the bootlegs end, with a near 10-minute version of Coney Island Baby. And beautiful. The Reed adds in some additional improv during the monologue. The monologue is beautiful and very, again, it's just so naked and vulnerable. And but the playing, Fanfara's piano is majestic. Again, this is very life-affirming, and the Glory of Love becomes a sing-along refrain with Marty Fogel playing very intensely, and again, elegant bass playing from Bruce Yaw. Like, he can go off and do jazz stuff, but he can also just really lock in and just play beautiful, elegant lines, primarily on the outro. There is one other song that was released on this, the Between Thought and Expression box set, and that is Heroine. Heroine is really, really great. It's coming in around 12 minutes. It is compared to the Heights, because the thing about this, Heroine comes from later in the show, from the unrecorded part, so that somehow was recorded. That stretch where they're going from Lisa Says into, like, they are ultra confident, and they are the best band in the world at that point, right? They truly are. By the time it gets to Heroine, you're at the embers, you're at the ash, and that has its own poetry and intensity to it. But by that point, I think it would be more rewarding in the whole context of the show. I love it on here, but on here it is a little bit of an oddity. And, you would still have to sort of Frankenstein from other performances what that would have felt like in the complete set. But it is a great performance. The songs that were unrecorded that night: Rock and Roll Heart, Charlie's Girl, Kill Your Son, Satellite of Love, would have loved to have heard that, How Do You Think It Feels, Berlin, Temporary Thing, Ladies Pay, then Heroine, then White Light, White Heat. Unbelievable. But just a few days later, and I had not heard of this show until the purposes of this, back when the Lou Reed tour date website was created in the 2000s, this show wasn't even marked down as being recorded, and that was from November the 9th, so 8 days later, 1976, at the Paramount Theater in Seattle. And I'm just going to briefly run through the songs that weren't in the other set. This show overall is not the vibrant fire of Los Angeles. It gets there eventually. The opening part is a little more held back, because the band just come out fucking blazing in LA. So this has a slower build, but it is still super rewarding. So the version of Rock and Roll Heart, so I'm picking up about midway through the show. And I will link to this show as well. So Rock and Roll Heart, loose, jivey, good timey. Again, rolling as opposed to rocking, and it's a lot more keyboard led as opposed to guitar riff led. Reed is playing guitar, but it's definitely fanfara. And then we go into Charlie's Girl, which sounds not unlike Walk on the Wild Side. Weirdly, it's like a funk up tempo version of Walk on the Wild Side. You could be forgiven for not knowing the difference right away, but Charlie's Girl is incredible, and epic funk version, beautiful fanfara playing, and then it goes into Bruce Yaw does a bass solo, does like this fucking amazing jazz bass solo. And over the, and just throughout, like, Lou is truly at his King of New York, jivey, proto-hip-hop best. Like, truly, King of New York. Like, fucking bulletproof. Amazing. An amazing performance. And then, like I said before, the sort of the ghost of Berlin keeps popping up, because Berlin, like, on the Akron and Albany shows, you wind up getting all of these Berlin songs. You get Oh Jim, you get Berlin, you get How Do You Think It Feels? What's the one on The Kids? So it's interesting how that keeps popping up again and again. So How Do You Think It Feels? Again, loose and open-ended. It doesn't even feel song-like. It feels more just sort of jam-like. But then it builds into this like super ultra-frenetic climax. And then we go into the song itself, Berlin. And again, it has that weird, like, Weimar Republic by way of some after-hours lounge in New York, hidden away somewhere, led by fanfara and Reed delivering, truly, the vocal performance of a lifetime. Absolutely beautiful. This is a virtuoso performance. Check that out. Again, I will be linking to this. And then we go into Temporary Thing. And what Temporary Thing goes further than it does on the album. It's a super, again, dramatic build-up, amazing jagged guitar, feverish primal scream of a vocal performance that is dark and evil. And again, one of the most unhinged vocal performances Lou Reed ever gave. And just when it's going into areas where you think it sounds like a man having a psychotic break, where he's going into the end of John Lennon Mother, singing Mother territory, he then like breaks and sort of goes into like a monologue and is like cackling. It is a fucked up performance. It is incredible. Like, you owe it to yourself to hear it, especially if you like what's here. This goes 50 fucking paces beyond that easily. Unbelievable. It becomes this theater piece. It becomes this like weird, stark, modern avant-garde theater piece. It's incredible. And then Ladies Pay, which picks up where just where Temporary Thing left off. It's faster than on the album. And then another totally wild and open vocal performance. And Ladies Pay, this version of it, this really is the first song. When I said before in the review of the album, it really is like the first song of the Bells. And especially the sound that they hit and Reed's vocal performance, this is the Bells. This is the beginning of the Bells. And those snatches of narrative and people, wayward people trying to figure out what the hell am I doing, incredible. And there's a beautiful Michael Fanfara solo. And then it turns into a like totally frenetic speed freak outro of an ending. With Bruce Yaw just racing along on bass, like Bruce Yaw kind of leading but also running alongside the band. Incredible. And then we get Rock and Roll, which is basically like, again, kind of straight Chuck Berry rhythms. It's closer to Banging on My Drums than what you would hear on the album. And Lou Reed, if it hadn't been like this and that Kill Your Sons from Boston, you could put up and probably say is the best guitar playing of his solo career, maybe. It's certainly right up there. It's right up there with the Blue Mask. I wish he had done more of it. I wish he played more guitar, because he's on fire as a guitar player when he does pick up the instrument. And again, it's loose and open, and Bruce Yaw again is another fucking highlight. And then it ends with Heroin, that with Reed is on rhythm guitar, and I think it's even better than the LA version with Don Cherry. I think it's even better because the rhythmic shifts are that much more dramatic, because it's Reed controlling it with his guitar. And the range of dynamics that they get over the course of the 10 to 15 minutes, I forget how long it runs, is absolutely fucking stunning. So that is that. And I really can't recommend that you check that stuff out, the live stuff out, enough, because the Everyman Band was so formidable in this stage. And nearly everything they reached for, and they keep reaching higher and higher, they fucking hit. Right? Because they could play, they could reinvent these songs, they could imagine and interpret these songs, and then they could take them into all sorts of wild new places. And they did it constantly. And it is absolutely stunning. It is truly something to behold, and it is essential music. Reed was at another peak, like a true peak. And as a performer, feeling his oats in a way that he probably hadn't since the Velvet Underground, where like everything they're throwing at the wall fucking works. So check that stuff out. Trust me on this, I'm not wasting your time. There's a reason I'm going on so much about that. So anyway, that just about wraps things up here for Lou Reed in 1976, wraps up the Epic Trilogy. I hope that you enjoyed all of these. We have now jumped over the line for 200, so we have doubled since whatever that would have been, December or something. So that's really, really amazing. And thank you. Thank each and every one of you. And I thank you for your comments. And please like this video. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please leave comments. And also, share this video. If you want to throw it out there on Reddit or on Facebook or whatever, please do so. It is greatly appreciated. And otherwise, I have the next couple videos mapped out, and I'm going to be working on those. Like, I've already actually kind of started working on the next 2 videos. So I have a pretty fixed idea of what those are going to be. I don't want to totally give it away. There's a couple people on Facebook who already know, because somebody, I was straight up asked. So I didn't want to be, I wanted to give a real answer and not just some BS coy answer. So, so I'm already kind of into working on those and enjoying fall, and, and hopefully the rest of the year goes well. So for all of us, right? So anyway, thank you very much for watching. I truly appreciate it, and thank you for. We got over 200 subscribers. That's amazing, especially for what this is and how I do stuff. Like, that's amazing that there's that many of you. I love it. So thank you, and I will see you all next time. So until next time, bye.
You just finished watching Rich Talks Records. Now the anticipation